Welcome everybody to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm your host, ADHD and Attention Coach Jeff Copper. And today I would like to talk about procrastination in studying and the learning process. It's fascinating to me over the years in coaching hundreds of people on the learning process, how few people have any idea how they process and learn information. I find that most of them have a step-by-step methodology that works for them, but they're not clear about it. And since they're not clear, they just kind of wander around, just waiting for things to happen. So I'll give you a couple examples, and I think that it's self-observation is a little bit of a challenge because we're not really trained to do that. But I want to give you an idea of maybe what some of this looks like a little bit so that you can begin to observe yourself and understand how you study. Just recently, I was working with an individual who I'd been working with over a period of time. It was exceptionally clear that they're what we call a verbal processor, which academically is not a great term, but really means is not to talk, is not to think. And they had gone to class and they had taken some notes, and I was coaching them, and they were like, I said, what do you need to do? I said, well, I need to go study this stuff so I understand it. I said, okay, great. Understanding is an outcome. Once you understand it, you're done. But what's your process of getting there? And I asked this person this question, and we had lots of conversations about procrastination and the fact that when they were unclear about something, how to get past it. And so this person recited a whole bunch of, well, I need to sit down and read the study guide, I need to read the book. And I'm like, okay, I understand reading it is you're doing it, but what's your process of making this stuff happen? Anyway, finally, I said, listen, we've done this before. It seems to me that if you want to understand it, that you need to go have a conversation with somebody about it and go through it and talk about how it all fits together. This was foreign to this person in thinking about it, and they're in college today, and I think that the internet has really, in classrooms, have really kind of stymied this. But sometimes the best way and the most efficient way to learn information is a back and forth exchange with somebody where you say, hey, there's this thing, and you describe it or describe it in a different way, and then you get immediate feedback from the other person that's either positive or negative that kind of helps you put it into a context that really makes some sense. Often I've had people with ADHD who are learning actually go tutor other people, which you might think is kind of bizarre because if they don't understand it, how could they tutor somebody? But the idea is they begin to understand it as they're trying to organize it and explain it to somebody else. Another individual that wasn't in college but was studying for a real estate exam. There was two tests they had to take. One was like a class test, and then there was a state exam. And they had studied for the class test, and I think they passed with like a 75. I think you needed like a 70 to kind of pass it. But now they got to go on to the state exam, and it was supposed to be much harder, and you had to get a 75 to pass. And the person was procrastinating studying. And I began to inquire about it, and I asked, well, how do you study? And they didn't know. They said, basically, I kind of need to review my notes. And to me, that's overwhelming because they had taken the class, and there's so much there that you don't really know what to focus on. And as I began to work with the person and ask them questions, what became clear is they just really needed some type of clue to let them know what it is that they weren't clear on. So in other words, they had digested most of the information, but to do the exam, they really needed to find out the areas of weakness. And it really kind of came to going to take some practice exams, finding the problems that they got wrong, and going back and studying only that material. And as we began to talk about this process and outline it, it was fascinating to me because a lot of their past, when they reflected back in their college days and other things, that was basically how they studied, was starting with practice tests and working their way backwards. And so by spelling that methodology out and knowing what happens, a person can then sit down and say, I know what my process is. And if you were going to go out and say you're in a learning environment where there's, in this situation, where there's not practice tests or practice tests that's easy to find, then you can go search for those things in a more creative type way, because you know if you can find that type of stuff, then that's the way that you study. So the point of today's video really is if you have ADHD in your studying environment, all too often people just think about, I need to study and I need to understand it, which we understand once you're done, you'll have that knowledge. But you need to begin to understand your step-by-step process and begin to focus in on how you can take the class that you're in and adjust it so that it fits in your study process. Now, one other tip before we go. There are different processes. Sometimes it's for memorization and sometimes it's for compiling and understanding information, which actually leads me to another point. When I was in college and I needed to memorize information, my process was simple. I would sit on a hammock in front of my house and I would look at my list of things to memorize and I'd say, okay, A. All right, A is the first thing I remember. And I would look up and I would daydream and people watch. I love to people watch, by the way, as they would go by. And then I'd go, okay, what was it that okay, it was A. And I would look, okay, I got A. Then I would go, okay, A and 4. A, and then 4. And then I would look up and I would daydream and I would people watch. And then I go, okay, what was it? A3. No, it was A4. Okay, A and 4. And then I would just daydream for a couple minutes and people watch and I go, oh, A4. Yep, A4. Okay, now A4Q. All right. And I would go through that process until I got to, if there's 10 things I need to memorize, probably about 8 or 9. And I'd get bored. And the last 2 I would memorize when I was walking into the test. Some people do that with flashcards. But my point in emphasizing this is begin to understand the way you digest information, plan for it, study for it, or set those things up. And I think that you'll find that it's a lot easier to go about the study process when you methodically know how that you do it. So we hope you've enjoyed this tip. For more great tips, subscribe to Attention Talk Video by pushing on the button right below this. And with that, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Take care.